Jumbo, and welcome back to my channel, everybody. So I'm going to share with you my favorite healthy cookie recipe. These are plantain apple cookies, and they are healthy enough to eat for breakfast, and they're delicious, and they are paleo autoimmune protocol friendly. So the ingredients are 2 ripe plantains and an apple. You also need 1/3 cup of cassava flour, a tablespoon of cinnamon, a dash of sea salt, and 2 tablespoons of olive oil. All right, so first we got to get the plantain peel off of these 2 plantains. So you're going to want to cut off the ends, score down the peel with a knife, and just take your little thumb, stick it in there, and your peel should come right off. Now, I get asked all the time, can I use 2 bananas in place of 2 plantains? And my answer is no, you cannot. They get a little mushy if you try to do that. So stick with the plantains, but you can find them at your grocery store in your banana aisle. All right, so now I'm just going to take my apple and get the peel off of it and cut the apple pieces down into fairly uniform sizes, roughly the size of like your thumbnail. I don't know, you don't have to get fancy with it, but that's generally the size that I tend to stick with. And really the most important part is getting the peel off, because that gets a little tough when you bake these. Now this is just a base recipe, so you could totally add in other things, like if you like walnuts or raisins or dried apricots or whatever, you can be totally creative with this cookie recipe. This is just kind of like the bare bones of it. And if you want to leave it as is, like what I do, it tastes delicious. So you'll see that I leave 2 of those little apple pieces unchopped, and I do that just to help sweeten up the cookie when I throw everything into the blender. You can use a food processor for this as well, just kind of makes it easy. So speaking of the food processor and blender, I do cut down the plantain a bit just to help it process into a batter kind of easily. If you just have a potato masher though, you could totally use a potato masher and forego the blender. I'm just lazy and use a blender. So I'm just gonna take my plantains and the 2 pieces of apple that I didn't roughly chop and throw it into my Vitamix. I have no idea where my food processor is, so that's why I'm using the Vitamix for this. And I use the plunger that's included with that just to help it process down. But Vitamix, does a really pretty good job of getting a batter going here. So I've got my 2 plantains in there and my little couple of apple pieces. I'm gonna add in my 2 tablespoons of olive oil. I'm actually gonna stick my spoon in there to get most of the olive oil off of my spoon also. And then I'm going to start adding in my spices. And I apologize for the blurriness here for this part of the recipe. So I got my dash of salt there, and I've got my 2 tablespoons of cinnamon going in. Just eyeball it. Again, I don't really measure, and it works great. So then I'm going to take my 1/3 cup of the cassava flour, grab it from Whole Foods or Amazon. Most grocery stores are carrying it now also. And just throw that in there and pop the top on and use the plunger. This is going to kind of process down into a consistency of a thick pancake batter, roughly, just like a liquidy type of batter. So then once that's fairly well processed, I'm going to go ahead and add in the chopped apples, and I'm literally just going to add them to my my Vitamix here and just take a spoon and like stir them around because I don't have any big bowls here either. You do what you got to do when the cookie craving comes. Okay, so once I have that all kind of mixed together, I'm taking my parchment lined baking sheet and just dropping a couple tablespoons or more of batter onto the cookie sheet. And again, I don't measure. You could make them big, you can make them small, whatever you want to do, it doesn't really matter. And just making sure that there's enough space in between them so they don't turn into just one big, large cookie, because we've all been there. So then I'm just going to take the back side of the spoon and press them down into cookie shapes. Now the thing with these cookies, since there's not like baking soda, baking powder, anything like that, they're not really going to rise or spread or do much of anything after you get them formed into your cookie shapes. So get them in the shape that you want them. They're not going to be pretty, but they're doggone delicious, let me tell you. And I just use the back of a spoon and I try to make the cookies as evenly sized as possible. These ones actually ended up being a little on the large side, but I like big cookies. What can I say? It's fine. So then I just make sure all of them are uniform shaped. And then I'm just going to take these, pop them in the oven at 350 degrees for about 30 minutes until they look fairly golden brown. You could up it to 375 375 for about 25 minutes if you wanted to do that. But I tend to do 350 for about 30 minutes. So then once they're done, they pop right off of that parchment, and there you go. Let them cool. They'll become really chewy and super duper delicious. And they'll last in the fridge or the freezer for, well, until you eat them all. See you soon.